Righto Moochers, day 8 of lockdown. Thanks to everyone for your suggestions on Instagram around what content you'd like to see. Probably the overwhelming thing was about light stick baiting. So I'll go through a couple of the setups I have, what leader to use, how heavy the braid should be, types of lures, and maybe when to use them. So the first most important thing to talk about with light stick baiting is that unlike with heavy gear, with the light stick baiting you just can't afford to have crappy gear basically. When it comes to your drag, it's got to be really silky smooth, because as soon as you have a slightly sticky drag with the lighter line, it's just game over. You might, fluke it and land a fish on just a stock standard soft bait setup, but if you want to consistently catch fish using the light gear, you've got to have good quality rods, reels, braid, leader, everything. It's got to be really good. Your FG knot just has to be flawless. Because the last thing I want is for people to go out there chucking stick baits around with their soft bait setups, because that's just going to end in a whole heap of kingfish out there swimming around with hundreds of meters of braid hanging out behind them. The other crucial thing with the light stick baiting is that you always crush your barbs on your hooks, because inevitably there's going to be a time when you bust off. Either they get you into ground or whatever the reason. If you crush the barbs, it gives the fish far greater chance of shaking the lure, and obviously a much better chance of surviving. Okay, some of the options as far as rods and reels go. I've certainly upgraded my gear thanks to Daiwa. So the reel I now use for the light stick baiting is the Certate 4000. Obviously your top of the range reel. Packs a whole lot of heat, this one. So these little reels have 12 kilos of drag. Not that you're going to necessarily use all 12 kilos of drag, but what it means is that if you do bump the drag up, it's gonna be silky smooth right the way through, and these things really are. So if you want to put a bit more curry on it, you're going to crank it up, and it's not going to be sticky. It's going to be nice and smooth. So far, the best fish we've landed on this was 1.10 m, I think, and I've caught a handful of fish over 1 meter comfortably with this. So it's not even like really sketchy, just fluking it. I'm pretty much backing this reel now to target kingfish off the rocks with. Yeah, so that's the reel, Certate 4000. Okay, and then the Certate is paired up with one of these TD Black Slugger rods. This rod is 8'2" in length. It's rated at 6 to 10 kilos. It's really your in-between rod, so it's like an extra heavy soft bait rod or a light stick bait rod. So I use it for both. For targeting snapper off the rocks, but I also use it for the light kingfish. The other beauty about the Slugger rod is that the casting weight ranges from 14 to 60 grams. So you've got far more range in terms of what lures you can use. So upwards of 60 grams, you're talking the likes of the OTL Piper, right down to little lures like this one from the Daiwa Spartan range. Cannot fault it at all. It definitely bridges the gap between soft baiting gear and heavy stick baiting gear. So the Slugger matched up with the Certate, you can't go wrong. Perfect for this style of fishing. Okay, so then onto the Braid. To target kingfish off the rocks, I've bumped it up and I'm now using the Saltiga X in the PE3. It's still got thin diameter, but the abrasion resistance is really good. Your knots tie up really nicely. You don't have any issue with wind knots. It's just really high quality stuff, and PE3, it's got phenomenal breaking strain. This stuff I can highly recommend, Saltiga X. And then at the business end, using an FG knot, the PE3 braid, I go to this 50-pound Saltiga leader. And again, this stuff, its abrasion resistance is phenomenal, but you can really back it in terms of, if it runs you into a bit of kelp, you can still work it out. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to go through is some of the lure options. The range of lures I have at this stage for the light gear is still pretty limited. I have got an OTL on the way and I've got an NACL on the way in 50 gram sizes. So really excited about those. There are some really good plastic options out there. So Daiwa have just brought out these new, the new Spartan range. They've got these little breakthrough 120 models, pink color. I've also got it in this gray and black, which has been really good. In the Spartan range, they've also got these rough rides, 140 floating. I quite like this green and silver color. So yeah, that's another good option there. I work a popper with just sort of short little jabs, just little fits of water splashing around is how I work it. So again, in the Spartan range, you've got these little poppers, which are a great option as well. The lighter stick baiting also presents an opportunity to use your soft plastics as well. So these have been dynamite this summer. These are the Z-Man Hero range, the 10-inch. Rigging these up, what I've been doing is I've been using a bigger jig head, so what are these, 5/8 of an ounce, and a bigger hook size, so 5 bar with a slightly longer shank, which sits at a perfect spot for the kingy to hit the head of the lure. You get a really good cast with that kind of weight as well, and it's an ideal sink rate too. So there's actually times when I'll cast this out and I will let it sink just about to the bottom, and then I'll work it right up through the water column. So when to use these lighter stick baits? Generally don't stand on the rocks and just cast and cast and cast with the lighter gear. What I've done with these, and I've found to be the most effective way to use the smaller lures, is to actually wait for some follows or to wait for one of your mates to get hooked up. So often you would have seen that when someone's hooked a fish and they bring it into to the rocks, you'll see it's got a couple of mates sort of trailing in behind, looking for an easy meal. That's when I've found that these smaller lures work the best. So you get an opportunity for, you know, multiple hookups, and those trailing fish that are in sort of just nudging away, they seem far more keen to hit a smaller lure as opposed to your normal 100 gram, 120 gram option. So if someone's hooked a kingfish and they've got it at the rocks and there's a couple others following, that's when, if you toss out these options, you're just about guaranteed to get a second hookup. Usually what I do is, as I'm casting away with the big lure, I'll have the slugger just leant up behind me, and it's always there in case, you know, they're really fussy on a big lure. I'll switch to the second one, the lighter gear, or if somebody else hooks up, the first thing I do is always I just race straight to the slugger, and I'm standing there with the slugger in case there's other fish following. It's how to fight the fish with the lighter gear, because it is completely different to the approach that you have with the heavy gear. So with the heavy gear, you can pretty much lock up and just try and skull drag the thing to your feet. With the lighter gear, if you do that, it pretty much ends in tears, because the kingfish will just run you ground straight away. So what I've found through trial and a few errors is you've got to do your best to just stay as calm as possible. With the drag, you don't set it so that it's, you know, right at its peak. I'll set a drag where, you know, it's reasonably difficult to pull the line out, if that makes any sense, but certainly not something where it's a real struggle to get the line out. So with that drag setting, once I hook up, the first 20-30 seconds of the fight, I'm not trying to pump at all. I'm just letting the fish just cruise off. Sometimes I'll even back the drag off even more. And as some of you might know, with kingfish, whatever you give, you get back in return. So if you go hard on the fish, it's going to go hard on you. So if you go lighter, 9 times out of 10, the kingy will also sort of cruise off. And especially where you know that out further beyond the ledge, it goes over sand, and you can afford to play a fish for longer, you know, then you can let it run. And once it's out of distance, then you can sort of work it back and forth with a slightly more gentle approach. The main thing with the light stick baiting and the fight is to take your time. So really take your time and try and keep everything smooth as possible. So you don't want to be there just pumping away, trying to pump it in. You've got to take your time. And, you know, with a fish that's over a meter, for example, you can expect to have a fight of somewhere between sort of 10 to 20 minutes probably. The other thing too is when you get it to the rocks, you're going to have to be really patient when you want to land the fish as well. It's really easy to make the mistake of going in too soon, because you can't just sort of grab the leader and grab the tail and yoink it out like you would with heavy gear. You've got to pick your moment really well. So there'll be many times when it comes up and it looks like it's poked, and then it'll gas off again, and it'll do that probably 4 or 5 times, even more. When it comes up onto its side really nice and calmly, that's when you can get into the water and try and get your arms under the fish, get that tail hold, and get the fish right in your elbow. Yeah, and that's how you land it with the light gear. Don't do the usual grab the leader and the tail. Try and get in there and grab the tail and grab the body and then lift it out like that. It's a really exciting way to fish, but you've got to do it right, otherwise it's just going to end in disaster every time. So again, quality gear is number one. You've got to have really good knots. You've got to back your FG knot. You've got to take your time in the fight, and you've got to be really careful when landing the fish as well. Probably the only other thing is that because the fights tend to be longer, hopefully you're all going to release your fish. The fish are usually pretty knackered when you get them onto the rocks, that you've got to work really quickly to get the fish back in the water, because if it's already buggered before getting onto the rocks, you don't want to then take too much time. You want to get it back in the water really quickly. So quick measure, quick photo, back in the water, happy days. Chunky guy.